I have a simple question for you. Do you think the Mona Lisa should be remade? I mean, think about it. It's been 500 years. I'm sure some better artists than Leonardo da Vinci have come along by now. There's probably better techniques, better technology. I mean, come on, bro. You expect me to look at the Mona Lisa with these graphics? Now, of course, I'm being facetious here, but I think you know where I'm going with this. I don't want to completely remake my Silent Hill 2 video because I think all of you guys already know how I feel about video game remakes. I just don't think they should exist, for the most part. The only video games that really should be remade were the heavily flawed games that are either forever unfinished or were overly ambitious and the technology at the time made it so the developers couldn't fulfill their dream game, their magnum opus. But it's obvious that whenever one of the games that is considered to be one of the greatest games of all time, for whatever reason, is being remade, it's obviously a cash grab. Or if we want to be charitable, you could say it's an attempt to revive a dead IP. And Konami themselves admitted that they want to revive Metal Gear, so it makes sense if they were to pick any game in the series to be remade, it would be arguably the most popular one. Now, I'm going to give you a crazy take right here. I think Metal Gear Solid 3 is a good game. I know, I'm a huge contrarian. Metal Gear Solid 3 being good? What? It's just movie game slop. Actually, there are some of you that legitimately believe that. That said, I don't think it's a perfect game. It's definitely not one of my favorite games. So this is not going to be like my Silent Hill 2 remake review, where I compare all the aesthetic changes between the original version of the game and the remake, because I only played MGS3 one time 11 or 12 years ago, and I'd forgotten most of it when I played through the remake, which was probably pretty evident if you watch my live stream gameplay. So I'm not making this video as a super fan who is here to nitpick every change from the original. As someone who is a casual fan of Metal Gear, I've got to say, outside of a few glaring issues that we'll get into, this is a pretty faithful graphical remake. And of course, the discussion around remakes is a little bit different when it is what some people would call a remaster. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole debate about what's a remaster, what's a remake, what's a reimagining, etc., etc. I'm just going to call this a graphical remake because essentially that's what it is. I think it might actually be more appropriate to call this a deluxe remaster, which is ironic given how crappy the Dead Rising remaster was last year, but that's more or less what this is. Now, before I get into the finer details of this remake, there is something important I need to bring up, even though I don't really want to. You may have noticed that the channel has been hurting quite a bit lately. There's been a lot of speculation as to why this is happening, and mine is far from the only channel to get hit lately after YouTube's latest algorithm change a few weeks back. But for some reason or another, my views have been in the toilet despite my engagement metrics being as high as always. I mean, you guys are always pretty good about liking the video and commenting. Whatever the reason may be, YouTube has recently added a hype feature that is specifically for any channel under 500,000 subscribers. So I guess I need to tell you guys to smash that hype button now, which sounds horrible, but maybe it'll help the channel. I'd really appreciate it if you hyped the video. God, I hate saying that, but I'd really appreciate it if you did. Okay, back to Metal Gear Solid Delta. It already kind of goes above and beyond by adding back the Guy Savage minigame from the Dream sequence and the Ape Escape minigame as well. These are things that a lot of modern remakes would have just cut without a second thought. So there's no doubt in my mind that this is an above-average remake that is being held back by a few glaring issues, the main one just being the performance. That's not going to be something I spend too much time on because I'm not a technical expert, but if you've ever watched the channel Nick Tech, I think he shows off pretty simply how poorly this game runs. It is very terribly optimized. I mean, even with a 5090, your GPU fans are shooting louder than a jet engine. Given how tiny the maps are in Metal Gear Solid 3, it's ridiculous. This isn't a sandbox game. Probably the biggest area is like a quarter square miles or something. The game is a bunch of tiny little maps with just a handful of enemies sprinkled, yet it can't even maintain 60 FPS with the best graphics cards on the market. And the frame drops sometimes happen at the most random times. Like, there's a small swamp area early on in the game, and there's rain pouring down around you, and if you just turn around the camera too fast, the frame rate drops to like 20 or even worse. I even had a bizarre crash early on where I just knifed a crocodile one too many times and the game crashed, and apparently this is a known issue that they're working on fixing. The worst part in the entire game is right near the end during the Shagohod boss battle. For some reason, the frame dips to ridiculous lows throughout like half the fight or more, which was starting to make the game borderline unplayable. And I'm sure many of you noticed this is a running theme with Unreal Engine 5 games. They're all poorly optimized, stutter like crazy, have insanely high system requirements, all have the same aesthetic style because they're outsourced to India and China where they have these asset farms. And that subject is probably worth its own video, but given how many more UE5 games are coming out the rest of this year, I might as well just wait until they all release, and then we'll talk about that subject in a future Gaming is Dying style video. So while sure, I can acknowledge good things about this remake, I think the graphics mostly look quite good, though a few of the characters look uncanny, particularly Ocelot, whose chin has been elongated to the degree that he now looks like Robbie Rotten, which is incredibly distracting. And the boss, although she always looked pretty androgynous, now just straight up looks like David Bowie. I mean, that's a man, dude. Another thing too is that it reuses all of the original voice lines and animations from the game. Reusing the voice acting is not so bad because I think they'd really screw it up, and they probably wouldn't rehire David Hayter, for being honest, which would completely ruin the experience. But at the same time, some of the voice acting was very questionable from the original, which, you know, was 2004, people's expectations weren't that high. But the boss is incredibly monotone throughout the entire game. It definitely just sounds like she's reading lines off a script.
I'm afraid I must ask you to show me some proof that you and he were not in collusion.
You don't trust me, is that it?
Not that, but he is your apprentice.
What do you want me to do?
And the same goes for quite a few other characters as well. I'd also say Ocelot comes across very flat at various times. So re-recording some of those lines would probably be pretty controversial, again, because it'd probably replace the actors, but at the same time, as long as they had the ability to switch between the old and new voice acting, I think that would actually add a lot to this remake. I mean, they already did that with the controls. You can do the legacy control scheme or the new control scheme, and it actually fundamentally changes a few aspects of the gameplay from what I've been told. I only played this with the new controls, which feel quite good, definitely better than the original. And I honestly don't really have any major complaints. I think the gameplay in Metal Gear Solid 3 is great. But as for the other issue, the reused animations, a lot of these look very goofy with the updated graphics. I mean, the whole PS2 motion capture rigging just looks pretty jank and over the top. And I know that Metal Gear has always been very over the top, basically just anime with a realistic art style. But yeah, some of this is a little cringe. Now, since you already know how I feel about remakes, and this is a purely graphical remake, so there's not even that much to actually talk about, you may just be wondering at this point, should you buy the game? Normally, I would save this question for the conclusion, but I'd say it's pretty important to just answer this right here. The simple answer is no, because it runs so poorly, and maybe they'll patch that and fix it, who knows. But as of right now, $70 for a game that might not even run on your computer, and from what I've heard, it also runs terribly on console. No, there's no reason to buy this. I'm sure there's going to be some people who want to buy this out of principle just because they want to revive the Metal Gear franchise. But as much as I don't like Kojima, is it really Metal Gear without Kojima as the director? Yeah, he's not the only reason these games are good. Obviously, he's not. All you have to do is take one look at the Death Stranding games to know that this is probably more likely a George Lucas situation where the people around him were just as important, if not more so, than he was at making sure the game is actually good. I don't feel like looking it up, but if we're just saying hypothetically it takes 50 to 100 people to make a good game 20 years ago, most of those people were important. This was not a time where you had a million fake tech jobs, basically professional babysitting for women and diversity hires. No, every person that worked on the Metal Gear games was important. But I digress, that subject could be its own video. Even though the short answer is no, you shouldn't buy the remake, the long answer is maybe a little bit more complicated because some of you have probably never played Metal Gear Solid 3 or any of the Metal Gear games other than 5. So you might be wondering, how well have those games aged? I'd say when it comes to gameplay, Metal Gear Solid 3 is definitely still a very fun game, especially when you've forgotten most of the game, so you still sort of have that joy of discovery of how to beat the creative bosses, right? My live stream chat basically bullied me into doing a non-lethal run of all the bosses, which I'd never done before, and so that provided a pretty unique challenge for me that made it a lot more interesting. As far as stealth games go, especially if we're comparing to modern ones, Metal Gear Solid 3, at least on hard difficulty, really doesn't give you a whole lot of player feedback. Some of it is borderline trial and error gameplay where the enemy sight lines are definitely above average for the stealth genre, I'll say, even with a great camo index. So you can get instantly spotted around a corner by an enemy that, unless you're playing the game at a snail's pace, you're not really given enough reaction time to avoid being immediately detected and setting off an alert status. And alert status is very annoying in this game because they send quite a few enemy reinforcements. For the hell of it, at one point I just tested how many they were going to send to my position. I just hid behind a doorway and shotgunned them as they opened the door over and over again, and ended up killing like 20 people. And the weird thing, too, is that this is something that's not normal for Metal Gear, because Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 have the Soliton radar, and so you have an overhead map that lets you see the enemy guards' locations and their sight lines. MGS3 doesn't have that, and on hard, it takes away two of your main ways of detecting enemy positions. You just have a personnel radar that just beeps when you get close to somebody, which is really not that helpful. Instead, you have the camouflage mechanic, which is kind of a mixed bag, because despite there being so many different camo patterns, you're really only going to use like 3 for most of the game, unless you're doing a non-lethal run of the bosses, in which case they give you special ones that have additional abilities. This game even has a slight pay-to-win element to it, because if you purchase the deluxe edition like I did to get the 2-day early access, it gives you some bonus camos, including 2 from Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, the game that takes place after 3. And one of them is an armor that makes it so you take significantly less damage from everything at the cost of moving a little bit slower. So I don't really know how to feel about that. The movement debuff does balance it out a little bit, so it's not straight up pay to win, but yeah, that feels a little bit scummy. Maybe not as scummy as the fact that early access for modern games exists at all. Hell, I probably could have made a video about that years ago. It's really annoying that someone like me doesn't get any review codes because of my reputation, and so I have to pay extra money to play these crappy modern games that I know I'm probably going to hate just so I can get these videos out in a timely manner. The survival mechanics also feel pretty tacked on. I think having to eat food to keep your maximum stamina up is fine, not too intrusive, but the cure system is incredibly annoying, having you pause in the middle of gameplay just to activate several items that you're likely never going to run out of. It adds absolutely nothing to the game and just slows it down. Probably the only gameplay element that obviously wasn't very well thought out or tested, because honestly it should have just been thrown away. To not go into like this long diatribe about Metal Gear Solid 3's basic gameplay mechanics, if you played MGS5, it is somewhat similar, but definitely less forgiving, because it doesn't have that little slow-mo thing, I forget what it's called, when an enemy detects you. As soon as you get detected, that alert status is going off almost 100% of the time. Of course, the game is more forgiving in other ways. I mean, tranquilizing people is just incredibly overpowered in this game, period, because no guards find it weird when they find their teammates fall asleep out of nowhere, even in front of them. So you can just trank one guy, then trank another guy, then trank a third guy, and then you move on to the next zone, right? With the only limiting factor being your ammo and how many suppressors you have, which really isn't that bad, but it's plentiful enough that you don't even really need CQC to stealthily take down enemies. But I think despite their small size, or maybe because of their small size, the variety of maps is quite good in this game. The amount of enemies feels appropriate. There's enough gameplay variety in the sheer level design alone that it never gets boring. No, the gameplay is definitely not the problem with MGS3, it's the story. We'll get to that in a second. But the true highlight of the gameplay is the boss battles. This is something that the Metal Gear games have kind of always been famous for, that basically every single boss has something unique about them that changes up your playstyle at least a little bit, right? Whether it's a guy who surrounds himself in hornets to use his armor and then sends them as like homing bullets toward you, or a sniper who uses your own stealth abilities against you and you gotta use a directional microphone to hear his breathing. Or a guy who climbs trees like a spider and shoots crossbow bolts and sets up traps all across the arena. I especially like that taking that guy down non-lethally requires you to leave poisonous food on the ground that he'll just pick up and eat. That's actually a pretty creative and fun solution for that fight. That said, I absolutely hate the Fury just shooting flamethrower blasts everywhere. Absolutely infuriating to take out non-lethally. The boss variety in this game is really good. They're pretty much all iconic, and they were easily the most memorable part of the game for me. In fact, I'd say most of what I remembered from my first playthrough was the boss fights, and I'd forgotten a lot of what happened in between. So even though this is definitely a stealth game, the mandatory boss battles are all great. You know, you never hear anybody complain about that, whereas if I remember back in the day, Deus Ex Human Revolution, when it came out, everyone hated the boss fights and wanted to play the game full stealth. Why is that? Well, the boss fights sucked. If the boss fights were good, like the Metal Gear games, I don't think anyone would complain about being forced out of stealth. Now, I'm not going to say every boss fight is good. I honestly don't think the last few are. And some people might find that heinous to suggest that the final boss is not good, but realistically, it's a glorified QuickTime event. And I think the remake even messed with the timing on the CQC counters. Maybe I'm just bad, my reflexes are getting slower than a snail's because I'm gonna turn 30. But I digress. Yes, you can defeat the boss by just shooting at her, but it's obvious the intended and much faster way is to counter her CQC attacks, and then you can even shoot her with a tranq dart afterward to make it go even faster. You could say thematically it's very satisfying considering she beats your ass like 4 times over the course of the game, which is another thing I'm going to get into shortly, don't worry. But it honestly isn't very fun, and it's not very challenging either, unless you count testing your reflexes as challenge. I don't. And so yeah, to conclude this segment, the gameplay in Metal Gear Solid 3 holds up very well in my opinion. It is still a very fun game. That doesn't mean you have to play the remake to experience it. You could just play one of the various other re-releases of this game over the past 20 years. But yes, Metal Gear Solid 3 is absolutely worth playing, without a doubt. That said, it's time we get into the story because this is really where I have a problem. Metal Gear Solid 3 is essentially the origin story of the series. Instead of following the adventures of Solid Snake, we play as Big Boss, aka Naked Snake, the original one. And this is essentially a spy thriller set in the 60s during the Cold War. And the basic plot is actually very similar to Metal Gear Solid 1. We have to infiltrate a military base and stop an experimental weapon that can launch nukes stealthily, which could cause World War III and end the world, right? The spy thriller aspect is handled fairly well. Half the characters in the main cast are a double agent of some kind. My biggest problem is that as an adult, someone who's been exposed to left-wing propaganda for over a decade at this point, it is very obvious how left-wing Kojima has been since the beginning. This might actually be the most blatant piece of political propaganda he's ever produced. And I know people might think that sounds crazy given how obvious some of the symbolism in the 2 Death Stranding games are, but Metal Gear Solid 3 directly advocates for globalism through the most blatant Mary Sue character that may have ever existed outside of a teenage girl's fanfiction. Seriously, the boss is one of the worst girl boss characters that I've ever seen in my life. And I know you guys are going to think I'm exaggerating, especially if you haven't played the game in a long time. So I'm just going to give you a very basic description of her. The boss is a middle-aged woman who fought in World War II as part of the special Cobra unit that helped end the war. She fought on the beaches of Normandy while she was pregnant. She is considered the mother of special forces. She helped develop the greatest martial art, at least for warfare, CQC, alongside Naked Snake, and despite the fact they worked together to develop it, she whoops his butt 4 times over the course of the game. at like 50 years old. I'm not even joking. Oh, and I almost forgot, on top of everything else I just named, the boss was also the first woman in space. Does it add anything to the story to have this extra little detail? Not really. Except it was part of her monologue about globalism being good, actually. Now, I know you're gonna get some Kojima fanboys that come up with all sorts of excuses how this isn't blatant left-wing propaganda, that not only is one of the greatest soldiers who ever lived a woman, but also she fought on the beaches of Normandy, dude. If this came out today, if Battlefield 7 or 8 or 10 or whatever had a campaign where a girl boss fought on the beaches of Normandy and stopped World War II, everyone would say it was woke. Every single person. The only reason that people wouldn't say it's woke is just because this game came out 20 years ago and because it's over the top in like anime, and so you're not supposed to take it seriously. And yet, Kojima fanboys 100% take it seriously. They follow this philosophy. Speaking of philosophy, her personal politics are straight up propaganda. She believes that the world was whole once upon a time. Her entire motivation as a character is to create world peace because that's how we used to be. We all used to love each other as human beings. That was never true at any point in human history. Are you kidding me? Globalism was never successfully implemented, thank God, and it sure as heck is not a good thing. Again, as an adult playing this game, it is so blatant how much propaganda is in here. It is crazy. And you can't even say that you enjoy this series in spite of the boss, because she inspired the entire events of the whole series after this. Not just Big Boss's actions, but also Zero's actions and that of the Patriots by extension, aka this universe Illuminati. The boss is arguably the most important character in Metal Gear outside of Big Boss himself. And people are just okay with this. There's other details too I left out as well. She's Ocelot's mother. Metaphorically, she's Big Boss's mother figure as well, on top of whooping his butt in multiple occasions, so read into that how you will. And Snake has to kill her at the end of the game. She has to be the fall guy to achieve world peace, even though that's not what happens. She thought that somehow getting access to billions of dollars was going to fix the world somehow. That's another incredibly naive left-wing way of thinking. Oh yes, if you just throw enough money at a problem, we'll solve human nature. Yeah, that makes sense. Whatever, my point is, no, Kojima is not this Nostradamus who predicts everything that happens in the future. In fact, part of the monologue is that the boss doesn't think the US and Russia will still be enemies in the 21st century. Oops, I guess he didn't predict that one right. Even the things Kojima did get right. Infamously in Metal Gear Solid 2 about memes and AI and all that stuff, a lot of that wasn't even written by him. That was written by Fukushima, who wrote all of the codec calls. Also, a lot of that stuff was already predicted by sci-fi authors decades before he did it. I just hate this like cult that Kojima has around himself, because it's been very apparent by his last two games that he's a hack. He is nothing without his team. And that would be worth its own video, but whatever. I was supposed to be talking about Metal Gear Solid 3, right? The point is, I think it's a great game. I do. But it definitely has one of the weaker stories in the series. Not as bad as 4 or 5, for sure. That's when Kojima went full George Lucas on the series and basically ruined everything. But it's definitely not one of my favorites. It's without a doubt overrated by Metal Gear fans, and it is full of left-wing propaganda if you have even a slightly analytical lens on these sorts of things. But I'd say, as a video game, the gameplay is still quite good, holds up really well. It's just the pacing of the game itself is very poor. There's no doubt this is a movie game, but the difference between this game and modern movie games is the movie's actually pretty decent here. I know I just said the story's bad, but at least a lot of the cutscenes are really entertaining because of the over-the-top anime nature of the Metal Gear universe. Even though I hate the boss, I think Colonel Volgin is a great villain. Eva is a great love interest and still hot as hell, even if they made her breasts a little bit smaller in the remake, it seems. I think Ocelot also makes a great rival character. And I don't even need to go into the various memorable moments from this game. It is considered one of the greatest games of all time for a reason. Now, do I necessarily agree that it holds up super well? Kind of. I mean, in some ways it does. Again, gameplay, still very fun. Story, not so much. Pacing is really bad, I would say. Yes, there was a certain novelty to movie games back then. I mean, if there's one thing you can give La Creatividad credit for, he really did invent the modern movie game, which is not a good thing, by the way. Definitely not good. And so if the question of this video is, should you try Metal Gear Solid 3? As I've already said a couple times, yes, you should. But the more specific question is, should you buy the remake? And at least right now, absolutely not. It's just too expensive and it runs like crap, so why would you buy it? Is it a good remake? I don't know if I'd necessarily use the word good, but it is one of the best remakes that's come out in the past several years, because at least it's still Metal Gear Solid 3. It's not a reimagining that ruins everything about the original. No, it's a graphical remake, a deluxe remaster or something, right? And so if you just wanted to play Metal Gear Solid 3 with better graphics, maybe that's worth $70 to you. I don't think it should be. I think at most it should probably be worth $50, more likely $40. And so yeah, maybe check it out when it's on sale, especially if you want to get the Metal Gear franchise revived. Though I've seen the Steam player counts are pretty low, so I don't think this is going to meet Konami's sales expectations. Not that I'm sure I'd even want to see Metal Gear without Kojima, honestly, because as much as I think Kojima himself is overrated, it's not going to be Metal Gear without him. Let's be honest, right? So before I end the video, I do want to point out that this was a little bit of an experiment. The experiment being making a video without a single swear in it, because I'm not entirely sure why my videos have been suppressed even more than usual in the algorithm. So I'm experimenting a little bit here. I want to see if this video shows up under restricted mode on YouTube, because yeah, that's a thing you can turn on, and my entire channel is blank. Not a single one of my videos shows up under restricted mode, which is a little concerning. I'm not sure if that actually matters or not, but since there's no swears in this video, maybe it will show up and maybe this will be promoted a little bit more. I don't think this necessarily counts as self-censorship, because I definitely got across every thought I wanted to share in this video. It's just without profanity. I guess we'll see. If this video still bombs, then maybe it didn't matter all along and the algorithm just hates me for whatever reason. But that's about it for this video. Next review, I'm sure, will be Hollow Knight Silk Song. So I'll see you next time, guys.